don't normally get requests for videos, but this one was interesting because there's not a real vast collection of videos on how to use router fences. Now, router fences come in a variety of shapes and sizes. We've got everything from your regular split mouth here. We've got another split mouth that's a precision fence that I've screwed a piece of oak into to use as a straight edge. Another split mouth. This Bosch one can be both a split mouth and a continuous edge. I don't know if that's an official term or not, but and then you've got specialty fences like this laminate trimmer fence here that goes with this cordless trim router from Metabo HPT. There's a number of ways to set fences up, and there's a number of reasons why you would want to use a fence. And they all pretty much work one of two ways. You've either got coarse adjustment fences like this one, or fine adjustment fences like this one and this one. But basically I want to go over, at the request of a viewer, how to set up various fences for different routers. I've got 4 different routers here. This one's technically 2, so I guess you could say 4.5. I just got 2 bases here for this Bosch 2.3 horse router. And I just want to go over the various ways that you can set them up and what you would use them for. Now, what would you use a router fence for? Well, as you saw in the last video I posted, I'm actually going to go get one of those. You can use a router fence to cut backouts for casing, which this hasn't been molded yet. I have yet to get to that. And what this ensures is you get a straight line, as long as your edge is straight, you get a straight line all the way down the length of the board. And this is the case for all of these fences, with the exception of the laminate trimmer. This can go around corners if you want it to. And all essentially a back out, which is what that type of cut is just a wide, long, shallow dado. You can also use routers to make dados, and it's actually one of the safer ways, in my opinion, to make dados. Either by using a fence, or you can use a router table like I have. I actually prefer using the fence. It kind of depends on what I'm using, or putting a dado on. You can use it to make dovetails. I don't know why you would, but you could also make a really long keyhole slot if you wanted to. You can make wainscoting, V-grooves, all sorts of stuff you can do with a fence. And most of the time when I'm using a bit like this big old chunky 1.5 inch mortising bit that doesn't have a bearing on the bottom of it, I call those, well, they're unguided bits. You could freehand these, I guess, if you were hogging out material for, say, mortise and tenon joinery. But usually the way I use straight bits and V-bits and dish, all those types of unguided bits, any bit without a router, a bearing on the bottom of it to guide it along the edge of the board, I typically use with the fence. I don't do a whole lot of freehand routing with these types. It's not to say it's difficult or it can't be done, it's just the type of work I do. I don't really run into that situation very often. So I think I've talked enough. I'm going to go through a basic overview of each one of these. I've got a Bauer trim router. This was my first trim router. It's the second router I ever owned. The first one was like a crappy Harbor Freight Chicago Electric plunge router that broke on me in a week. Go figure. I got a Bauer here. That's from Harbor Freight. That's like their better brand. This pretty much got superseded by this. I say pretty much. It absolutely got superseded by this Metabo cordless trim router. I've got this cordless plunge router. I've got this Bosch 2.3 horse plunge and fixed base router kit with the fence that I had to buy separately. Thank you, Bosch. And I guess I'll go over the laminate trimmer too, although I have never really used it. So enough talking, let's get these over to the bench so you can see what I'm talking about. Okay, so first we're going to start with these two trim routers. Functionally, the fences for these are identical. They even look the same. In fact, I bet you this would probably fit on this, and this would probably fit on that. But both of these essentially work just like the basis for pretty much all trim routers, which is the Bosch Colt, which I don't have one here. But there's a screw here, or a thumb screw in the back. You're going to loosen this. And this has a washer. You want the washer on the outside. Line up your slot here with this. And you want it flush with the base. This part. You want this flat spot to be flush with the base, usually. And then you're just going to tighten this down. Pretty tight, because routers make a good bit of vibration. And you would basically move this in and out depending on where you wanted your data or your V-groove, whatever, by loosening this and moving this in and out. I'm going to set this one aside because I don't really use this router a whole lot anymore. And I want to have a conversation about safety, pretty much. The bits on these spin pretty fast. The range on the motor for this one is something like 10,000 to 30,000 RPM. I think the slowest router I have is probably 25,000 RPM. That would probably be that Bosch. So you want to set this up the correct way, or else you're going to have this thing zooming off and not only wrecking your workpiece, but potentially injuring you. Set up properly, these things will pretty much keep themselves flat up against the edge of the board by themselves. So, what I'm going to do for you guys here is I'm going to set a dado about 1/4 inch from the edge of this board. I'm going to do that with this fence, and I have a 1/2 inch mortising bit here. So I'm going to put the fence on, and I'm going to mark out where I want my dado to start relative to the edge here. As you can see in here, maybe, the teeth on this bit go one way. Pretty much all routers spin the exact same way. And this is going to be the direction that the bit spins when you turn it on. Now basically what you want to do is you want to set the router up so that the direction you're feeding it into, I guess it'd be on this way, the leading edge, this is going to be the front of our router. As we roll through this cut, the leading edge, that side of the bit, you want the teeth facing towards the fence. So when you feed this forward, the rotation of this bit as you hog out more and more material is going to push away from the fence and pull the fence towards the edge of the board. If you do it the other way, the router could skip off and jump off the edge of the piece and leave you a nice gouge where you don't want one. So I'm going to set this aside. We'll throw you in telephoto mode here, and I'll show you what I mean by that. Okay. So what I want is I want a 1/2 inch wide dado running the length of this board, and I want it to be, let's say, 1/4 inch. Now let's do 3/8. 3/8 of an inch from this edge the whole way. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my combo square here, set it to 3/8, roughly. I'm going to take a mechanical pencil here. I'm going to stick this lead in the groove of this combo square here. I'm going to try and do this for you guys. You don't need to do the whole length of the board. This is mainly for a setup. First thing we need to do is we need to set our depth, our base depth here on the router. And the way we do that I'm actually going to take this fence off for this. The way we do that is you just want to set the base of the router on your workpiece, loosen this up, let it go all the way until it's resting on the workpiece itself. Then it's clamped. Now, the bottom of the teeth of this bit is flush with the base here. And what you're going to do is you're going to look on your depth scale up here, figure out the depth that you want to cut. In this case, I want to cut 1/8 of an inch deep. These hashes are 1/8 apart. So when I go to set my depth, I'm going to drop this router in its base 1/8 of an inch. But before we do that, we want to set the distance of our router. And there's a couple ways of doing this. This is one of two ways I'm going to show you. We're going to rotate the bit until it is the furthest away from our fence, because that's going to be the outer edge of our cut here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to loosen this fence depth adjustment here and move the router so that the edge of your bit is right on that line, and then you're going to tighten this. I've set my fence depth. I've tightened this up so that the furthest edge will ride this line. And next, what we do is we want to set our depth of cut now. So just like I showed you guys before, what we're going to do is we're going to drop the router 1/8 of an inch. And now we've got 1/8 of an inch of the bit coming out. So the router bit is spinning this way. You're pushing it forward, so most of the cut is happening as it swings around here. And what that bit is going to do is it's going to push the router this way, and the router is basically blocked from zinging off in this direction by the fence. So when you push this forward, the router is going to keep itself where you want it. So as we want the dado on this side, as we push it through, it's trying to pull itself this way, but it's blocked by the fence. So what we're going to do is I'm going to hook the battery up. I'm going to set my RPM. Now, because this is 1/2 inch, it's rated for like 24,000 RPM. Considering this thing goes all the way up to 30,000, I don't want to start it at 30,000, obviously. So I'm going to go at about 4. And I'm going to clear the area. Put on my ear pro. And you're going to see as I make this cut that the router is pretty much going to keep itself where I want it. Make sure you can see, yep, you can see the whole thing. That was a little sketch at the end there, but whatever. Now, some of that line is actually still left. Right here, next to my thumb. You can see we're exactly where we want to be. And the cut is 1/8 of an inch deep. And at no point, other than the end, did that feel unsafe, because the router was pulling itself against the edge here, therefore keeping our cut where we want it. Now, something you can avoid, one of the problems you're going to run into, and it's the reason there's 2 screw holes here. I'll show you with the next router, my Plunge Router. You can screw a piece of wood along here. I'll take that battery out. You can screw a piece of wood along here, which I've done with my other Metabo fence, and that is essentially makes it so this is one long edge. As you saw when I started that cut, the router itself could wiggle a little bit, which is going to throw the accuracy off on the end here. And just because this is a demonstration, I didn't feel like going and getting another piece of wood to throw on this thing, but that's why the piece of wood is on that other fence here. This fence is especially wide for an open mouth, and you can see there's 2 screws here. The reason this mouth is here is in case you're only making a partial cut and the bit needs to spin around in this area, like with that 1.5 inch mortising bit I showed you earlier. If you were trying to do a rabbet with that, about half of that bit would be spinning around in this area. That's why this is wide mouth. But if you're just doing an inset dado here, you don't need that area, so you can give up this mouth for more stability. So I'll set up the other router and I'll show you how I do that. I'm going to get a different piece of wood. Okay, so here's the exact same setup that I was using for the backouts on the casing. This is a Freud 1.5 inch mortising bit. The other bit I was using was a 1/2 inch mortising bit. This one's 1/2 inch shank, so it's a little bit beefier. So on these bigger routers, especially with the Bosch, but also with this thing, I like to pull as I go. I find that it's just easier on my back. But you can also push like I did with that trim router. Now the reason you can get away with pulling with this router is because you can set the fence on either side. So you would set it on one side if you were pulling, and the other side if you were pushing. I'm going to be pulling here, so I'm just loosening these screws so that we can fit our fence in. And this router is really easy to see. Since we're going to be pulling and the bit is spinning that way, when we feed into the cut, most of the force is going to be pushing the router this way, so we want our fence on this side. So we take our fence, actually before we do that, I'm going to set our depth here. Now this router is, I change lenses. So this router, excuse me, is what's called a plunge router. Now the trim router I had before is a fixed base router. Most trim routers are, but Bosch and a couple other companies also make plunging trim routers. Sometimes you can even get a kit that has both a plunge and a fixed base router in it, like the full-size Bosch I'll show you here in a second. But to set the depth on this, we want to take our depth scale, raise it up, and basically you want to make sure your plunge lock is loose. Plunge it down so that the bit is just barely touching the wood. Lock it. And you're going to loosen this so that it's touching any one of the turret settings here. And you want to move this plastic, it moves up and down. You can set it to the 0, which I'm going to do here. Now we have our depth stop set up. And you can set your depth of cut one of two ways. I'm actually, as much of a fan as I am of Metabo HPT, I'm not really a fan of this turret depth stop. What you would normally do, I guess we can do it here, is you would start on your highest setting, then set your depth stop like I just did. Lower this, set your plastic to 0, and you would raise it. And this router only has 3 depth stop settings on its turret. The Bosch I have has like 6 or 7, so yeah. I guess this turret, if you wanted to, you could take the screws off. Basically, these are supposed to be in 1/8 inch increments, and the screws are here in case you want a 1/16 or a 32nd as your final depth cut, whatever. But you would set it on your highest, and then how far you wanted to cut, you would set your depth turret to that, so when you plunge this down, it'll be 1/8 of an inch proud. So I guess that's what we'll use. So we'll use 1/8 of an inch. Now that we've set our depth, make damn sure this is very tight. And then we're going to put our fence on and set it for the depth this way. Alright, so for this cut, we're at 1/8 of an inch. By the way, on depths, if you're cutting anything more than 1/8, the general rule is you don't want to cut more than half of your bit's diameter in one pass. Now, that being said, this bit is 1.5 inches wide, and half of that would be 3/4. And I don't know of any router on this planet, besides maybe a shaper, that could make a 3/4 inch pass in one go. Typically, the max for this bit I find, so that you're not overworking the router, is about 3/8, maybe 1/2 inch. But we're only doing 1/8 inch here. You know what, screw it. We'll do, what is this? We'll do the lowest depth stop setting because I want to show off how powerful this router is. It looks like about 3/16. That doesn't really show it off, but it's deeper than 1/8. So what I'm going to do is we're going to flip this over, and keep in mind which direction we're going. We're going to be pulling the router this way. So we take our fence. You definitely want to be unplugged for this, or it'll help you if you put the fence on the right direction, you doofus. You put the fence on. Now it's unplugged, there's no battery in it. What we're going to do is we're going to push the base down and lock it. So the furthest in this tooth will ever cut is the orientation that it's in right now. And since we want a 1/2 inch space between the edge of the board and where the cut begins, we're going to use our combo square here, the ruler on it anyways. There's a focus point, maybe. We're going to set it up so that the edge of the bit hits this 1/2 inch hash mark while this is up against the wood here on our fence. And there's a coarse adjustment and a fine adjustment on this fence. So we're going to start with the coarse adjustment. Maybe. Actually, no, we're not. We're going to just lock it down right now because I don't have a whole lot of the fence left. So I'm going to undo this thumb screw. There's 2 thumb screws. And move our fence inner out. They get us about to 1/2 inch. Let me make sure we're still in focus. Yep. To about 1/2 inch. That's actually pretty good. Tighten down our course adjustment. Loosen our fine. And we can make any last minute in and out adjustments. Looks like we need to come in a little bit, so I'm going to turn the screw. Alright. Perfect. Lock our lock. Loosen our base. And by the way, never let these bases fly up on their own. Always hold it while you undo it. Or set the router on its base and then loosen it and let it come up on its own weight. Don't ever let these snap up. You could hurt the router. So now we're all set up as far as the fence goes. Now let me zoom out and show you the coarse and fine adjustment. Okay, so when I first put the fence in, this outside edge here, this is where the actual fence locks into the base. So you tighten these thumb screws, and then you've got your fine adjustment knob here, and then these 2 are your coarse adjustments. So you would loosen these and move this bar in or out. This bar carries the actual fence. You loosen that, move it to where about you want it, tighten these down, and then there's a thumb screw in the bottom of this that you loosen, and you can turn this knob in or out to get really fine adjustments left or right on the fence. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put on Ear Pro. Set my speed. It is actually already set from the last time. And I'm not going to run this cut the entire way through. As you can see, it's clamped on one edge. Actually, I will. I'll show off what trim or plunge routers are good at. This is a really unprofessional video, but whatever. So we're going to start this cut. And then I'll stop here, lift the router up, move these clamps to the other edge, plunge the router back down, and then finish the cut for you guys. So, battery in. And since we don't need to plunge, I'm just going to start with the router base down and locked. And, well, hopefully you guys can see. Yeah, that's 3/16, and the battery already doesn't like that. So what I'm going to do, now that it's done freaking out, turn it back on. I just realized you probably couldn't hear me with that on. I'm going to turn it back on, plunge it down, lock it down, continue the cut, and go slower this time. That's one of the things I really love about this router is it has a brake, so the bit stops immediately. Alright, now the reason the router stopped is there's a circuit inside this router that's kind of like an overload protection kind of deal. if it senses too much strain on the motor or too much draw on the battery for its own good, it'll stop it. So that's what happened. I was going too fast. The router said, no, no, tone it down and shut off. Grab ourselves these. Move our clamps. Clamp her down. It's one of the huge advantages of a trim router is you can use one hand to hold down the workpiece and another hand to hold the router. But with a full-size router, you have to hold the router with both hands. So you either have to clamp down your workpiece or have someone hold it for you. So now we're going to replace our router, plunge down, and finish the cut. Hopefully I don't run into my miter saw here. And just like I was saying, never let it pop up on its own. Do that. There we go. That was a lot of material. This is maple. And by the way, maple is one of the best woods to practice with routers because it burns easily. So it's a really good balance of knowing how fast you need to go while not going too fast so you don't rush your work and mess something up. So I'm going to clean up the gigantic mess I just made and get our third and final router out here along with another piece of wood and show you something else. So yeah, that was a lot of material. Out of just that one board we got all this. Alright, while I'm setting this up, the funny story about this router, I had literally just bought this thing and did an entire project with it. I believe it was a pair of barn doors with some tongue and groove. It's inset paneling in them. Did that whole project. I was like, ah, yes, good investment. And then Metabo HPT sends me a message on Instagram. I was like, hey, we have a product we'd like you to test out. And a couple of weeks go by. Lo and behold, what shows up in the mail? That cordless plunge router I just showed you. I spent, between this and the router table, like $500 on this whole setup. And now I hardly use the darn thing. So, I'm not complaining, but it's just kind of funny to me. Alright. So this is kind of a ubiquitous router. This, oh, my burritos are done. This router set is pretty ubiquitous in most woodworking shops, professional woodworking shops. This is Bosch's 2.3 horse. It's got some big long name. It's just a bunch of letters and numbers. But it's a modular router system. So on here on the right we have a plunge router base, just like the Metabo I just showed you. And what the router is currently sitting in is the fixed base router. So this is like a trim router on steroids right now, basically. Now the cordless router I just showed you was 2 horse. This is 2.3 horse, so it's a little bit more powerful, but this thing is twice as heavy as that cordless router I just showed you, so I don't really use this thing a whole lot. But I'm not going to sell it because I know in the future I absolutely will need it when I have other employees, and you know, batteries in a woodworking shop kind of they go like hotcakes. So if we're ever in the situation where there's a battery on one tool, a battery on the other tool, and we just don't have enough batteries rolling around, we still have this thing. And this thing can do 1/4 inch collet and 1/2 inch collet, just like the cordless plunge router. But it's a corded router, so get this fat boy out. I'm gonna need these and these. I think we'll do. I'll just see what I have as far as extra bits laying around. I don't believe there is a bit in the router yet. Alright, last one. So for this one, we said 3/4 of an inch. Set our combo square. 3/4 of an inch. Get our mechanical pencil. Scribe a line. And this one I'm not going to do all the way through just for the sake of time, but this video is starting to get a little repetitive. So I think you can infer the rest based on what you've seen already. This one's nice and easy to set up, fine tune, and everything. I might not even have to fine tune this. Nope. Well, if you had to fine tune it, here, I'll throw it out of fine tune. Oh, I had these backwards. Interesting. So this you want locked down for your course. And you adjust fine with these. Maybe. Oh, I see. It's been a while since I used this router, guys. I forgot. You gotta have the screw like right in the halfway mark. And then you adjust course with these. Interesting. Anyways, now we loosen these. Now, and of course you've got specific adjustments here. This is admittedly a much nicer fence than what's on the Metabo, but yeah. So now we're all adjusted. All we need to do is plug in, put our ear pro on, everything's already clamped down. That's the other thing I don't like about corded routers is you have to keep an eye on the cord. But luckily this one works out. So I'm going to stop, let's say, Let's say for whatever reason we wanted to stop at a specific spot. Like, right here. Nice job, pencil. And we wanted to make a square mortise for whatever reason, for like drawer sides or whatever. I'll show you how we do that. Now, if you were doing something as fine as drawer sides, you would obviously want to start with a shallower cut, but for the sake of time, a couple things went wrong there. By the way, if you ever end up with this situation, don't let this stuff sit in clumps. Always brush it out onto like a concrete floor or something. Because the last thing you want is a fire. So, why did it burn? Number one, because it's maple and it does whatever the hell it wants to. And number two, I had too much bit speed, so it was rotating too quickly, and I wasn't going fast enough. Now, I was already pulling about as hard as I could. Not as hard as I could, but as hard as I safely could. So, what I should have done is just slowed the bit down. Now, what do you get fast speeds versus slow speeds as far as bits go? Fast speeds will get you a finer finish with less cheddar marks. Slower speeds will help you avoid burning like this. And I kind of overshot my mark because I was trying to move it fast enough to... Oh, what a disaster. I was trying to move it fast enough to avoid the burning because I saw it happening early on, but... It was a nice lesson on how not to do stuff. But anyways, right here, you talked me into it. So I do know what I'm doing. I'll slow her down to, let's say, 19,000. Do it again. There you go. Now there's a little bit of charring where the bit stopped, but the rest of the cut is good. And there's no flaming bits coming off. I would even slow it down a little bit more than that. But yeah, that router's a beast, man. It's just heavy. It's got way more power than you could ever use. Unless you were running like raised panel cutters or something like that. Then I would get a 3 1/4 horse. Alright. A couple hours later, and a much sweatier me. I don't know about you guys, but I'm ready for fall and even winter. Yeah. So I know I made mostly dados, essentially. in this video, but you can also do rabbets with the fence. You can also do, like I said, wainscoting. You can do all sorts of stuff with the fence. It's not just dados. I'm just showing you the way I usually use a fence. Yeah. So if you guys have any specific questions about specific routers, it's very obvious I haven't used that Bosch in a long time. It kind of ran that thing a little too fast, which is very easy to do. If in doubt, start like 3/4 of the RPM you think is safe. If you set the RPM too low, you have one of two choices basically. You can either just move the router slower, or you can stop the cut and up your RPM a little bit. There's no rule in woodworking that says you have to do everything right the first time. In fact, most of woodworking is correcting the mistakes that your boneheaded brain made the first time around. That's what separates, in my opinion, a good woodworker from a great woodworker, is knowing how to fix what you mess up. So if you guys have any specific questions about specific router systems, I have a fantastic working relationship with Metabo HBT. My brain does not like words coming out of my mouth in the correct order, apparently. Most of the tools I use on a daily basis, with the exception of this thing, are Metabo HBT. And simply it's because Metabo HBT does not make big floor machinery. I wish they did, but most of the stuff I have is Metabo HBT, but like I said, I do have some Bosch stuff. I've got an electric hand plane by them. I've got a router table. I've obviously got this 2.3 horse router from them. I have some other tools as well that are from other manufacturers. Not a whole lot, but enough where I've used them enough to know what I'm talking about when it comes to reviewing them. So if you guys have any specific questions about any specific tools, I guess what I'll do is at the end of this video, I'll just show a B-roll of pretty much everything I have. And if you guys have any questions about anything, you let me know. I am more than happy to do a video review on any tool I own. Even this thing, if you guys want a review of this thing. I have mixed feelings about the molder, don't get me wrong, but it's an awesome tool. If you guys have any specific questions, just let me know and I'll do a video on them. Hopefully something a little bit more clear and a little bit more concise, quicker, more entertaining than this video. This is mainly just at a crowd request to show I have 4 different routers and 4 different types of router fences. So this is basically how you set up most of them. Pretty much any other router brand like Makita, Milwaukee, DeWalt, all their fences are going to be some variation or combination of features of what I've shown you today. You've got the far extreme on simple, that Bosch has the far extreme on complex, and I think companies like Bauer or Incra might even make fancier fences than what's on that Bosch router. So if you guys have any questions, just let me know and I'll try and get to them. If you guys don't mind, I'm going to clean up and go ahead and go inside with the air conditioning. Thanks for watching. Enjoy some B-roll in the crickets. Oh, now that I call you out, now you say nothing. I got all night, buddy. Come on, make your noise. You do it all the time when I'm working. I know where you are, too. I can see you. He's just not chatty today. Just wants to throw shade when I'm talking. I see how it is. Crickets these days.